Welcome to the first training seminar for Wipeco Industries and American Textile Mills. I'm Danny Zacco.
I'm Mark Babin.
And through the next few videos, we will be presenting all of the product lines that we cover for new employees, but also for our existing employees who are just looking for a refresher. So the first product line we will be talking about today is our rag product line. Now the rag product line is our bread and butter. This is where most of our sales are done. And we will be breaking down every single category so that you have a better idea of the products that we offer. Wipeco Industries was founded 30 years ago with the rag industry in mind. Today, we offer a full line of different products, and it is important that you're able to distinguish amongst the different products because, as we say here, a rag is not just a rag is a tool, and for every tool, there's the right application. Therefore, in this case, there's the right rag. So Mark, I'll let you start.
Well said, Danny. So rags have a variety of different sources. If you were to look in your closet and see the clothing that you presently have in your closet, you'll understand the source. Very simply, used clothing, when you give to charities, end up coming through the cycle of exporting to used clothing, and then eventually we give these products a last life, whether it's coming off of a cutting table in a new material or coming out of your closet or manufactured overseas, directly overseas to our specifications. We have everything that's necessary in a textile wiper to offer to the marketplace, one of the most diversified lines in the industry. So there's a lot of properties involved in the wipers. We'll talk about the properties and keep these properties in mind as we talk about it. We break down the program into good, better, and best categories. Used clothing usually falls into the good category. One of the reasons is very simple, is consistency. From one piece to the next, it always has some variations. Percentage of cotton inside of the wiper will vary to some degree. And the size of the wipers is not cut consistently because of the seams within the product. And we do our best to create rectangular sized pieces at the cutting level, but it's physically impossible to offer a real consistency from one piece to the next, whether it be an extra small baby size clothing to a double extra large with the big shoulders. You end up with a variety of different sizes, and when you cut it, it comes into a different product over and over again.
So for our new Wipeco employees, if I were to simplify this, essentially what we do is we will take old clothing. So think about the t-shirt that you're wearing right now, or the one that you have at home, or the shirt that I'm wearing right now. We will cut off any buttons, any zippers, any obstructions that are in the way, and essentially cut the shirt open. Now, depending on the way we cut it, if we cut through the seams or right in the middle, it'll give you pieces, as Mark said, that are different sizes. Now, what's a seam? Some people might be asking that question. A seam is essentially the stitching that's in the back of two pieces being connected together. So as an example, the shirt that I'm wearing now, the sleeves are not the same fabric as the torso, the central side of my shirt. They are connected together. And so if I were to flip this over inside out, you would see that there is a sewing seam that connects both of them. And that's very important. We will be talking about that a little bit later, but the seams dictate whether or not, for the right application, you're doing something that requires seams or not. Because as you can imagine, having a seam in the middle of your rag could have its downfalls for certain applications where you're trying to spread some paint around, or you're trying to do anything that's a little bit more sensitive, where you want uniformity in your application. You want the seam to be removed.
When you're thinking about an effective wiping tool, you have to think about how a rag is used. Technically, a rectangular piece of rag with no seams in it, can be folded down and creating 8 surfaces that you can unfold and wipe and unfold and wipe. Someone who uses a wiping cloth professionally understands that. And so if they're using it day in, day out, and they can create these surfaces, you have 8 wipes versus a product that is inconsistent in size and you can't create those surfaces, it becomes a less effective wiping tool. And when you're actually wiping, if that seam falls in the middle, you can create actual streaks. In the case of staining, for instance, you put down stain onto a piece of wood and you wipe with a product that has a seam in it, you'll create a streak. So the most popular wipers in the staining industry happen to be new material, rectangular pieces with no seams in it, highly absorbent.
Great.
So the most important factor when you're looking at good, better, best is usually the cost per pound. What is your client thinking of when you present a wiper is, I'm throwing this away. I want it to cost me the least amount of money possible. So in his mind, cost per pound is the most important factor. We need to dispel that myth. As salespeople, we have to talk about cost per piece and cost per application about these wipers. In order to really bring forward the most effective wiping tool, you have to dispel that cost per pound being the most important product. So we're talking about properties of the wipers which will dictate the cost per piece, which is more important than cost per pound.
So what do you mean? Different products have different quantities of pieces per unit?
Well, if you think about, first of all, the GSM, grams per square meter, the thickness of a material. The thicker the material, the more it weighs. And if you have the same size wiper, so a standard wiper, let's establish a standard first of all. What is a standard wiping cloth? What does the industry think of when they think of that's a typical wiping cloth? I've always used the basic item of a rental shop towel. Basically a 14 by 14 piece, bordered edges, 100% cotton. That is the standard in the industry. You see them out in the industry all the time, sticking out of the mechanic's pocket, the mechanic using it in their garages where you'll probably be exposed to most of the type of wiping that you'll see is a shop towel. So with a shop towel, you have a very consistent size. You start dealing with, so the question was, just to get back to it, was
what is the difference essentially between, why is it that you have more than one certain pieces
Right.
per pound in some products versus others?
So GSM, getting back to that, so the thickness of a typical shop towel, you'll get 14 pieces in a pound because on average, if it's the same size all the time, you're very consistent, you'll get, and we use this approximate as a calculation, 14 pieces in a pound. If you go to a very heavy material, so let's use denim jeans for instance, one of the most readily available products out in the marketplace, not very well liked. Why? Despite the fact that it's 100% cotton, readily available, and super cheap, we don't sell very much. Well, it's because it's a very heavy material. You actually don't get a lot of pieces per pound in a denim material. And secondly, the performance is not that great because it's such a tightly woven material that while it'll absorb a liquid when you pick up, it has no trapping effect. And this is another thing we'll talk about. The looseness of the fibers allows also not only to absorb, but to trap some of the dirt, therefore enhancing the performance of the wiper. The looseness of the weave also will dictate the performance of the wiper.
So think of it that way. If you had a bath towel, really big piece bath towel that's made out of terry, okay, you would probably only get 2 of these giant bath towels into 1 pound. Whereas the same product, terry again, as a face cloth, which is much smaller, you could probably get 7, 8 pieces to get 1 pound. So it's all about that. If you had a really giant piece, obviously I'm imaging here with something very big, but if you had a really giant piece, you can only still use it to wipe one thing. You're not going to carry it around for multiple uses. And the face cloth is the same thing. So that's why they might say that there's more weight. It's not about the weight, it's about how many pieces you find in each one of your pounds. And the opposite is also not very good. If you had really small clippings, very, very small pieces, well then you couldn't do anything with them. You could boat yourself and say, well, I got 20 pieces per pound, but the reality is, what are you going to use those pieces for? So it's about that sweet spot, finding a piece that's as close to a shop towel as possible, 14 by 14, square, or a little bit off shape, but that's relatively consistent. That's what we're looking for, and that's what you should be looking for when you're speaking with your clients.
So you did say the opposite also true, the little clippings, that's one dimension, but the other dimension is the thickness too, right? So if you have a threadbare piece of material, like say a white sheeting, comes from a hospital, been washed 100 times, and it's very, very thin, well, its capacity to absorb, while it might have some trapping ability, it won't absorb much because there's not much left to the material. So that's the other aspect of it too, is the thickness will dictate both at both ends of the spectrum. Too thin is not good, too thick is not good either.
Mm-hmm.
So Another aspect or property of a wiping cloth is the lint that could be left behind when using it. So obviously we're using wiping cloths to clean. The idea of leaving behind lint is not that great of a thing, but there's different degrees of lint freeness. I don't know if that's a word, but we'll assume it is.
And what is lint exactly?
Lint is particles of the material of the rag that you leave behind or can fall off in the application of wiping. So, for instance, use a terry cloth. Okay, terry is, now, here's a perfect example of a very linty material. Terry, when you cut into any of the edges, okay, is a woven material, and so when you cut into it, there's nothing binding the edges. Unlike a bordered shop towel, the edges can fray. That's the terminology. It can fray off, and because there's also a looping involved, when you cut, that looping can also fall off and fall into very big pieces of lint. A very keen test for lint is you take your wiping cloth and you take some Scotch tape and you put it on there and you pull it off. When you do that, you'll see on the piece of tape just how much lint is left behind off of that wiping cloth.
So is that the stuff that I see in the dryer every time I'm cleaning?
Good point, Danny. So that brings up a whole different thing, but yes, indeed, it is part of it. Cotton inherently is not a lint-free product because it's small little fibers, and when you dry your clothing that has a high percentage of cotton, what's left behind in the dryer is the cotton. The polyester gives it its skeleton, and the cotton is woven in to give it the absorbency and the comfort, etc., etc. And by the time a piece of clothing has gone through 50, 100 washes, you have mostly skeleton left. So if it starts out 50-50 polyester cotton, you're probably closer to 75-25 by the time you've washed it 50 or 100 times.
So the cotton stays in the product, but the polyester stays in the product, but the cotton slowly dissipates?
Well, basically that's the idea. The polyester is a man-made product. It's a very durable product. It's very strong. You won't be able to tear very easily a product that has a high percentage of polyester because it gives it a lot of strength. If you are looking at trying to tear something made of 100% cotton, your chances are you're going to be able to tear that, especially as it gets a little bit more worn. So lint freeness is a very important aspect to it. Degrees of lint free, for instance, we'll use some examples. The most popular wiper we sell by far is colored t-shirts. Why is that? First of all, it's a knitted product. Knitted products versus woven. Those are two different areas. Most of the sources of the materials come from either the knitted products versus wovens. Wovens inherently, when you cut into them, will fray at the edges. So they're like a one-time use. You use them, you throw them away, because if you ever try to wash them, they'll start falling apart and leave even more lint. Whereas a knit, just the way it's constructed when it's cut, does not leave lint. The way it's knitted, or the mechanical aspect of the stretch of a knitted product, and the fact that it's interwoven in such a way that when you cut into it, lint does not come off of that product the way it does with a woven. So it's more lint-free than a woven product would be in general. Other areas of lint-freeness, you start getting into 100% polyester. A knitted 100% polyester would probably be one of the most lint-free products we have to offer. Number one, there's no cotton content, which is the small fibers which create lint. And number two, it's knitted so that when you cut into it, it does not fall apart at the edges. So, but then you have the other side of it, the components of it. Cotton is most important because it offers the most absorbency, another property that we need to talk about. So absorbency, of course, the more you can absorb into the product, the higher performance it'll give in certain applications where you need absorbency, right? So your 100% polyester, the properties of absorbency in polyester are basically nil. It is a trapping effect, usually when you're dealing with polyester or any kind of synthetics, nylons and stuff like that, with basically one exception. Polyester is made of oil, and because like attracts like, when you are picking up an oily based product, the polyester will actually pick up oily based products and absorb into the polyester. So the one exception we have here is like absorbs like, and in this particular case, the polyester will pick up petroleum based products very well.
So some of the properties we've talked about so far, we talked about cost per pound, we've talked about
Lint.
and we've talked about absorbency.
We've also talked about seamless.
Yes.
Seams versus seamless. Another property, when you're dealing with the good, better, best concept, the less seams that are involved in it, the more effective the tool is. So seamlessness is important to give you the consistency. So when we're cutting the wipers, we get nice rectangular pieces which you can fold up and create those surfaces we talked about at the beginning.
And maybe this is a good time to talk about the Wipeco cut.
Yes. So Wipeco, ATM, we try to do things differently. Understanding the way we go to market, we are trying to create tools, and the better the tool is, the better performance it is. So how this was created in the first place was we were in the furniture manufacturing business. We focused on that industry for many years, created a whole program around it, and the most popular selling wiper by far in this industry is a white knit. So white knits fall into used clothing, white mill ends coming off the cutting table, and then new manufactured goods. We've concentrated an enormous amount of our time in the used clothing area. What we've done is, in order to create surfaces that are valued in this particular industry, we take a white t-shirt and cut into the seams of the t-shirt. So into the seams so that you have a full piece of white t-shirt that will, I have an example here. Here you go. So here's a small children's piece of t-shirt where we've cut into the seams on the edges and taken the sleeves off and created a virtually seam-free. The edges still have some seams at the bottom of the t-shirt and where the sleeve was, but in general, and we're talking about general because this is not going to be the case 100% of the time, this is what we're attempting to do, is create the perfect wiping cloth. So here you have a product that's been washed many times, and we'll go back into new versus used again. New basically is usually not very absorbent. Why? Because it's not been washed. We haven't broken up the cotton really well. In this particular case, the used clothing wiper, the white t-shirt, has been washed many times, highly absorbent, and now we have a nice consistent white t-shirt that you can create your surfaces and absorb very, very well the stain coming off of a piece of wood when you've applied it.
Think about what Mark just said and think of your dish towel. You've noticed that cotton has a very interesting property. When you buy a brand new dish towel and you try to dry your dishes with it, you'll notice that it won't dry very well. And usually we'll think, well, maybe it's not good quality because we bought it, at the dollar store or wherever it may be, but it's actually not the case. The more and more you wash that dish towel, the more the cotton fibers that are inside are broken down. And by breaking down these fibers, it actually creates a better absorbing towel. This is why used products who have been worn, who have been washed and rewashed and reworn, actually make a better wiping tool. They're more absorbent because the cotton fibers have been broken down. Now, Mark, you talked a little bit earlier on about the 8 surface professionals use. So can you just display that or explain how exactly a rag becomes an 8-time use, an 8 surface use?
Basically, you have a half fold and then you have a quarter fold. So right away, you have 2 surfaces right at the very beginning. If you open that up and fold it again, you have the 2 clean surfaces you just created. And then if you unfold it one more time, and this is not my profession, I'm not a professional rag wiper, you now created 2 clean surfaces, and then again, one more time, you now have your 8 surfaces we've talked about. And someone who's very adept at doing this can unfold and fold very, very quickly, and basically, a surface like this table can be wiped with 1 rag, if it's a good rag. And here's a good example of effectiveness. If there are seams in the middle of the rag and you're not able to create that surface, you might only have 2 surfaces to wipe with, whereas we create as much as possible an 8 surface rag. So if someone's using the rag properly, they'll get more use out of our wiper than they will out of someone else's.
Now, can this be washed? Can this be reused?
For sure, it can be reused in this particular case. The washing costs of washing this particular product, however, does not pay for the cost of replacing it as a virgin product, as it is. So the idea here is the cost per pound on this particular item, and the number of pieces you get out of it, the cost of washing, and the controlled environment you need for washing a contaminated product far outweighs the cost of just renewing this and throwing this away into the garbage.
So often the rule of thumb is what we say, when it's a cut product, whatever the product may be, it's a one-time use. If it's a product that has finished edges, then it becomes a reusable rag. So it can be washed, it can be reused. And then obviously it depends on what the client will be needing it for. Sometimes they'll even throw the ones that are edged borders as well. That's up to the client. But as a rule of thumb, we like to go by that policy.
So the other thing that you have to think about is, first of all, these are disposable wiping cloths. So they are meant to be used once or twice or whatever the case may be, and then thrown out. I like to compare who our competitors are in the marketplace in this particular product. I'm not talking about other rag guys. I'm talking about what other wiping tools are out in the marketplace. What are we up against when we're selling this particular product? Usually it's either a non-woven paper or a rental shop towel. Those are the two other areas, basically the only other areas that we find in the industry.
And what's a non-woven paper?
So anything to do with a heavy-duty paper product that's meant for wiping. It comes in different formats, whether it be a quarter fold or a pop-up or whatever. It's a manufactured wiper that's made from basically trees, tree pulp, and what's the terminology?
It's kind of like the rolls that we use in the kitchen, like those big Bounty rolls?
They are very similar, but much more heavy-duty. So when you actually, those you can tear very easily. The industrial non-woven wipers, they tend to have a lot more resistance, a lot more absorption capacity because the GSM is thicker, so it gives it a much higher performance than the standard kitchen towel that you see in the marketplace.
So in other words, a typical client of ours, a mechanic, he can either use a paper product, like the Bounty, but different, more industrial fit. He can use a rented shop towel, which is a product that he rents from a company, sends it back, and we'll go through some of the reasons why it's not good for you a little bit later on. Or he can use a rag, so a product from Wipeco, which is whatever the content may be, whether it's cotton, t-shirt, or fleece, or whatever it is, he can use one of those products. All of them serve the same purpose. The mechanic needs to wipe his tools, he needs to wipe the cars, he needs to, wipe his hands, whatever it may be. He needs to use one of these products.
We just offer, in this particular case, the most economical version of a wiping tool in the marketplace. So when we talk about that, the argument could be said that a paper towel wiper, a heavy-duty towel on a per-piece basis, could conceivably be around the same price or even less in some instances when they start getting into the real economy stuff. I like to always tell the story of the old fellow with his hanky versus a Kleenex. So in this particular case, the hanky is taken out, it is used to clean his glasses or whatever, and put back in his pocket and used all day long. A mechanic gets the same thing. You see the rags hanging out of the back of their pocket. It's because they want to come back to use it as they need it all day long. Kleenex, we have our society set up in such a way that anything to do with paper is a disposable product. They contaminate even just a little corner, it ends up in the garbage. And for that reason, if you look at it in terms of its overall application over a period of a day, chances are you're going to save a lot of money going to a rag. The other thing that you have to think about is shrinkage. You're not going to find very many people putting an old rag into their lunchbox on the way out the door at lunchtime or at the end of the day when they're working in an environment that allows them to do that. Whereas I've heard of many stories where if you have a nice little pack of quarter-fold non-woven wipers, they end up in the lunchbox, and shrinkage is a big component of the cost for companies.
So shrinkage is theft, essentially.
It is theft, without a doubt. There's the concept of going home with one of these packs amongst employees. They recognize it as having good value. They'd like to have it in their own garages, and so it ends up in that case. And I'll share one example of a contract where we had the contract for many, many, many years. We were selling them knitted baby clothing, so what we call used stretch terry. And their budget was $10,000 a year. And every year we bid on this, every year we won it, until Kimberly-Clark came along with their workhorse. And they did a marvelous job of marketing this product, and everybody wanted it. So the company, without a doubt, said, hey, we much prefer to have this non-woven paper than the old baby clothing. And they went with it for 1 year. Their budget went to $60,000 from $10,000.
Wow.
Now, I couldn't tell you exactly the reason why, but I would suspect that shrinkage had part to do with it, but I also suspect that people were just treating it like they do Kleenex and throwing it out and not reusing it like they would a textile wiper.
So if we go back to our properties, so far we've talked about cost versus pound, we've talked about lint, whether it's lint-free or not, we've talked about absorbency, we've talked about seamless or not, we've talked about whether a rag would be disposable or it would be reusable.
The other next thing on the list here is color. So
Okay.
we have colored available versus near white versus white, pure white. And color comes into effect principally because of two factors. Number one, the most important factor when you're dealing with any kind of chemicals, you have to worry about the colors leaching out of the colored wiper. So if they're dealing with solvents, for instance, in the body shop industry, in the paint industry, as soon as you put a solvent onto a color, that color could leach out into whatever it is you're trying to wipe and change the color. In the case of a stain, you have a nice, cherry-looking stain, and you have a dark black wiper that you put solvent-based stain on, and that leaches out. It's going to darken the color of your stain and distort the color that you want. And that's a good example of one application where they absolutely insist on having white wipers on a regular basis.
And for those of you who don't know what leaching is, try putting a pair of a t-shirt, a red t-shirt with your white clothing in a wash cycle. You'll soon find out that all of your white clothing has now turned pink. That is leaching. So any color in one of the products actually loses some of that stain every day as we're wearing it. And that color in the leaching process, so when it is put in front of chemicals, it's even amplified. So some of the applications do not require it for it to be specifically not non-leaching. But also, let's be true here, clients also like the white. That's why we sell it at a premium.
Well, I think the other, premium, yes, the premium has to do with availability. There is a high demand for white. The other aspect of why white or why near white is because you want to be able to see the dirt. Let's face it, the whole purpose of wiping something down is to take the stuff off that you're trying to take off. You're cleaning something. If you're using a dark colored wiper, you could conceivably be recontaminating where you just wiped because you can't see the dirt on the rag. So when you're dealing with light colored wipers or near white wipers or pure white wipers, it's about seeing the dirt as well, so that you don't recontaminate where you've just wiped.
And you've mentioned near white a few times. Can you explain what that is?
Well, in the case of our most popular wiper t-shirts, there's two different near white ways of looking at it. One is a t-shirt or another material which has a white base, but has colored in it in such a way that we cannot take that color out effectively and turn it into a pure white, because pure white always fetches much more money. Near white is going to be something where you'll be able to see the dirt better, but we can't get the color out, so it'll fetch a little bit more money than pure color will, and we separate it out for that reason. There's a bigger demand for near white because of the seeing the dirt aspect of it.
So it's basically a white t-shirt with like a logo on it or
Correct.
a little bit of color that's on it that creates the near white application, which is in between colored and white. Near white sells for cheaper than white would, but also is not completely white, so couldn't be used for a non-leaching application, as an example what we mentioned before. So if you had to put a percentage mark, what is the biggest seller? What do we sell the most of?
Oh, by far, colored T-shirts is our most popular. The knitted product, it is the most readily available, and what we receive the most of, quite frankly. From a mechanical point of view, from a dirty hands point of view, it does the job, and it does the job very, very effectively and economically. So if you're looking at percentages, you're probably looking at 75% of total T-shirt sales are going to be in colored T-shirts, and maybe 20 to 25% will be in white, with a little bit of the near white in between. So that gives you an idea of how it's broken down in the marketplace.
And what are the sizes that we have?
Well, that's a good question, Danny, because we treat T-shirts, especially white T-shirts, in many, many different ways to give different wiping tools. So for instance, sizing-wise, we have the special cut, where it's the big pieces where you can create a lot of surfaces, where we cut into the seams. We also have the actual sleeve itself, where we call that a quarter cut. So it's a smaller, actually shop towel size wiper, but has a few extra seams in it because it comes out of the sleeve. That is also very popular because then you have basically the equivalent of a shop towel. So for the sake of argument, 14 pieces per pound. There's a little bit of a premium to have these smaller sizes, but nothing that compares. And when you look at that versus the cost of a rental shop towel, it tends to be a lot less expensive. Another factor with the white T-shirts, we put more money into a white T-shirt because, let's face it, it's white. By the time we get it as used clothing, there are biological contaminants which are naturally found within all of these used clothing wipers. For instance, ring around the collar. Okay, any one of your T-shirts you've got in your closet right now could conceivably have that little yellowing in the collar, especially if it's a work T-shirt, or yellowing in the armpit. And so when we receive these used clothing products, we cut them in such a way that we try and remove as much of that dirtiness as possible, and we create a whole new category of products where we take those white T-shirts and put it through our industrial wash so that those biological contaminants are taken out, and it becomes washed white T-shirts. So industrially washed white T-shirts. Now in the marketplace, most organizations will say, well, of course, ours are washed. The differences between ours, where we say they're washed, and theirs is that when we receive the raw material coming from a charity or coming from an exporter of used clothing, wherever the source of the used clothing wipers happens to be, it is coming from your closet. You do not give away to charity a dirty T-shirt. It doesn't come out of your laundry. It comes out of your wash. You put it into a bag and you send it out. It has been washed. It hasn't been washed to an industrial standard where the ring around the collar and the yellowing in the armpit comes out, but in handling the white T-shirts as well, it can get dirty. So it's been put into big bales, it's been put on a cutting table, it's been handled by people, and so they could have been dropped on the ground and got a little dirty, or it has a stain on it. These are normal things that in the processing will happen to a white T-shirt. The most economical way to buy it is as is. Comes out of the bale, we cut it, we ship it off to our client as is. That's the most economical way. Added value stuff that we can put into it, the quarter cut and the washing. And then of course there's the near white too, where we cut out the near white. That is the most economical way of buying a white T-shirt. But the added value stuff is not that expensive for what it gives. Either a very, very clean wiper. And we also do, by the way, the full-size pieces, the seamless cut in a wash as well. So you have the quarter cut in a wash, you have the seam-free pieces in a wash, and we have clients for all of these that really like those products.
And so the seamless cut is the Wipeco cut, essentially.
It is the Wipeco cut. I'm not familiar with any other organization that takes the time, the extra time it takes, because it costs money to the most expensive portion of creating this product is not the packaging, it's not the purchasing, it's the labor put into the wiper to cut it into the size that you want. So by doing the seam-free cut, it costs us more money. But we want to provide the best wiping tool possible in critical, and here's another term we got to get back to, a critical application. In this particular case, white T-shirts are used a great deal in critical applications, and we want to give that added advantage, that extra value to our clients by offering these options.
So I think we've covered all the properties. maybe before moving into looking at the products one by one, we can cover the packaging, the different packaging that we offer.
Sure,
So, Mark?
absolutely. So Wipeco, under the name of Spilcon, which was a company that was purchased by Wipeco about 18 years ago, was the first company in Canada and perhaps in North America to have what we call compressed packaging. Though we have a machine that has a double piston. If you look on our website, the first thing that comes out is the machine itself being used. It'll show you how it's used, the piston pushing, compressing it at one angle, and then another piston pushing the wipers into a bag to create exactly what you see here is a compressed package of wipers. So any one of our wipers is available in these kind of packagings. We have it in a 4-pound retail pack that you see here. It has a nice handle that can be carried. It also has a zip lock so that it can be reclosed. You can take out a piece or two, you open it up and take out a piece, close it back up so it doesn't get contaminated, come back to it as you need it. Beautiful retail packaging. We're seeing that more and more actually in, for instance, the back of a pickup truck. Okay, the guy has a cab in the back and he wants to keep his rags clean. He can close that up. It's not going to get wet. He can leave it out there and it won't get contaminated and go and use the wipers as he requires it.
And so that's used essentially a lot for also little jobs. We sell this a lot to the retail industry, the big stores, the big chain stores. Somebody has a little project they want to do over the weekend. They stop by the hardware store. They're picking up, let's say, paint. They want to paint the room and they see a nice little bag like this, 4-pounder. They say, oh, you know what, let me grab one of these as well to do the work that I have to do. Now, Mark mentioned that all of these are compressed. A lot of the questions we always get is, well, how compressed is it? I mean, is it compressed to a point that when I open it, it's gonna completely explode because it's been really condensed? And the reality is not at all.
Not at all.
This has been slightly reduced. So if I were to open this bag, tearing it off, this is a 4-pounder, and opening the lock, there we go. As you can see, it hasn't moved at all. And usually that's what we'll see. When looking at the next sizes, it'll probably go increase an inch in diameter, but not anything more. So it's not a question of it being condensed to a point where, as you open the bag, it's gonna explode.
I've had questions on a regular basis as will this, will it explode or will it, it's not vacuum packed. There's no pressure in this whatsoever. It is literally compressed. Taking the air out of it is a very simple thing. And as Danny said, if you were to remove that bag completely, after it's been compressed like that, it might end up expanding a half an inch or so just as it settles. But there's no explosion effect or anything that happens when you open it.